community is a great big system, and trying to figure out how to fix it, the first thing I had to do was try to put it into a manageable container to be able to look at all the moving parts of community. I know we needed to fix it. I know we needed to make it better. Community needed to feel different for me and for a lot of people that I knew. And so as I began really a personal quest to figure out how we fix community, I needed the pictures, the symbols that would make it make sense to me and make it easier to explain to others who might want to come along this journey with me. And so even though there are lots of different symbols that have become part of this work, the convertible community work, creating communities that are life-embracing, supportive, loving, but efficient and resilient and economically sustainable. And in being able to move to the next step of this work, which is taking it to the people, I felt it important to begin to explain some of those symbols, really like a puzzle where eventually more and more the picture comes into view. But it starts with the umbrella on top. And that's the realization for me that unless people change, community won't become that thriving place when it started.
Morning.
Good morning. Yeah. So, the imagery for me began with recognizing that that we had to start with people. We know how to do housing, food, and collective or collaborative economics. But what happens is, no matter how good those solutions are, if people aren't living in ways that are socially sustainable, we don't make much progress. It may be temporarily a little bit better, a little bit more pleasant. We can build new houses and that feels good. We can feed people and for the time that feels good too. But if people don't become the kind of people that live sustainably, then we don't have the opportunity to see sustained progress, the continuation forward that takes us to a better way of existence. And so I realized very early on that core of who we are is really about our values, not just the things we believe, but the things that we have the capacity to actually live out. I might believe that I should treat people with respect, but then in my life I get into situations that trigger me, and I may not be able to actually live that out in my life in real time. And so when I began looking at community, it was if we dealt with that piece first. Could we deal with it last? Nope, because we mess up the systems that we create. Wonderful systems, solution providing systems. So I said, what would happen if we started dealing with that first? Well, then another problem came up because I realized we're not doing that too well. And it's not that we don't have solutions, because we do. And we do the best that we can. We truly live our existences as best as we can. If we could do better, we would actually do better. Even if we know better, sometimes that's not enough to help us do better. And it was, wait a minute, if we know better, if we have values that are loving and life-embracing and supportive and all those things that probably come to your mind, we think about sustainability from the social standpoint, why aren't we doing it? And as I thought about that question for quite a bit of time, every answer I could come up with took me right back to the same core. We don't do it because we got issues. Plain and simple. We have issues. But what are those issues? And if you spend any amount of time with me, you probably already know the issues is the ego stuff. It's the fear. It's the guilt. and the insecurities. More specifically, stuff happens. We interact with people who interact with us from their not so quite loving center, and that causes us damage. When that damage happens, it usually creates fear, guilt, or insecurity in our hearts and in our minds. And many times, we then create a set of behaviors, a set of actions that help us combat or interact or deal with that thing that has created the fear, guilt, and insecurity. In our society, I began to realize that we don't have good tools or good teaching that helps us effectively deal with things when they happen in life. We call it by a whole lot of names: trauma, issues. We call it by a whole lot of things, but it's the damage. It's the damage that we create person to person when we interact with each other in ways that are not quite loving. That was the core for me. And it was, okay, now that we kind of are getting to the core of the problem, how do we fix it? And I began to think, who in society says it's our job to fix that? It's our job to fix the thing that happens when our values and our expectations aren't met, and it causes us harm. I expect you to treat me with respect and in ways that are loving and supportive. I expect you to accept me for who I am. Not the raggedy, damaged parts of me, but the loving, true identity of my existence. And when that doesn't happen, man, it feels bad. It feels a whole lot of things in a whole lot of ways in our lives. And to get myself to a feeling of control or back to some sense of balance, I do things, I react. You hear people talk about being triggered. Usually that is because some part of that unhealed existence has been hit. And as old folks used to say, a hit dog will holler. Oftentimes, the reactions that we have, especially when they are not loving or when they are not loving, those reactions, the triggering, if we don't have better ways of handling it, often are things that create more damage to ourselves and to the others that may interact with us when we're operating in that unhealed state. Buenos dias. So once I figured out that that might be the ground zero of where we start to heal community, I began to ask the questions of who says it's their job? Who takes responsibility for that part of life, of society, of community? And I began looking, who says it's their job to impact values and to help us do the transformational work of learning how to live those values? And then I realized, I know one person or one group, one sector of society that says that's our job. And it was the faith community. And that's when my heart sank. Oh, geez. Oh, no. I grew up in the Christian paradigm of spirituality. And I began to look and say, if this was working, wouldn't we be better than we are? At the time that I started this thought quest, I was living in the South, Georgia, down near Macon, Georgia. And the per capita number of churches is ridiculous. And I said to myself, if faith was enough, we should be the most vibrant, robust area in the nation. And when I looked around, I knew for sure that wasn't the case. And so part of it was, if we're going to create solutions, then we gotta fix that sector who says it's their job. They take ownership of the responsibility of helping us align with values that truly are sustainable, and then help us do the transition so that we can live those values. So I came to that realization. And then I said to self, is there anyone else? Because fixing church, and not specifically Christian church or a particular denomination, but the spiritual community at large. That's who says we are the part of community that's supposed to help us connect with these values that spring out from love and help people live these values like in real ways, interconnected with each other. Is there anything else we could work on? Anything else I could work on fixing? I don't want to have to fix that, because that's a hot mess on any given day. And then I realized, is there anyone else that does the work in a way that's transformational and not behavior modification? Because I had determined that behavior modification is never the pillar of sustainability. I gotta either make you do something or bribe you to do something, but that's not sustainable, because if the goodies go, you go back to your old behavior. Or if I stop threatening you or take you out of the chokehold, you go back to your old behavior. That's not sustainable. So is there anyone else who does the work of value transformational living from a standpoint of transformational change and not behavior modification? And every one of those rabbit trails of thought led me back to the faith community, the spiritual community. You can call it by whatever name you want to, but that part of our existence that addresses the inner core, the inner man, the true self, the God in us. Insert your appropriate adage. And if that is the starting point, that is the sector of community that makes that sustainable value-based living possible, or at least supports it above and beyond what we do individually. If that's the collective community support, then it's not an option of whether we can fix it, it's we must. And that really started all of these plates spinning, and that became the pivotal leg of what is the three-legged stool. It's the threefold, three-stooled approach to how we fix community. But it had to start there, and that really being the umbrella. So if you think of this from an imagery standpoint, think of the umbrella being the values that we live in community with each other. So that's the starting point. I start with this umbrella, and that umbrella really is, how do we learn to live the values that make us as people, individually and in community, sustainable? A sustainable cog in this machine called community.